Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Phoebe Labat, and I'm a senior, and I study history. And this summer, I received the Center for the Humanities Student Summer Research Fellowship. It's a mouthful, but so I wrote this paper at the end of the summer, and it's called An Arrow Shot Through Time, the Power and Memory of Native American Philanthropy. So this summer, I wanted to explore the connections between the Choctaws and Cherokees, who were a Native American tribe, who were a Native American nation, and the Irish during and after the Great Irish Famine. How did I think of this? So last year, I had the opportunity to study abroad, and this brought me to the wonderful and beautiful island of Ireland. And while I was there, I befriended a bus driver and tour guide, Liam, and he told me this story at dinner one night. He said that there was a sculpture in the middle of County Cork that was called Kindred Spirits. And he said that the Choctaws had donated $170 to the Irish, and that the Irish then, in 2017, had erected the statue. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And so I decided to seek out the sculpture and its history. It turns out he was right. There was a donation, and there was a statue. But I wanted to explore this more. There was a lot about it in the Irish press, but what was the origin of the sculpture? Got it. Okay. So when people ask me about my project, I have to explain three things first. The first thing is the Choctaws and the Cherokees are a Native American nation who live in Oklahoma, but they're originally from the southeastern United States. They were removed from their homelands in the 1830s, and many of you know this as the Trail of Tears, and thousands of members of the Cherokees, the Choctaws, and other Native American nations died. Fast forward a decade, the 1840s were marked by the Great Irish Famine. Beginning in 1845, a potato blight struck Ireland. A fungus infected all the potatoes, and it happened during the end of the season, so farmers didn't realize until it was too late that they didn't have food for the winter. The effects of the famine were exacerbated by the fact that many in Ireland were dependent on the potato alone for their food source. And finally, American relief efforts that's another key kind of component to my story. New York, Boston, Albany, they've all been recognized in the past and in the present for their help to the Irish during the famine. But I wanted to explore kind of an unknown, sort of a new angle of this. So I wanted to answer, well, first of all, why did the Choctaws and the Cherokees give to the Irish in 1847? Everyone agrees that it's quite remarkable that they could, but why did they decide to do it? And second, I wanted to discover why did the Choctaws and the Irish all of a sudden in the 1990s decide, hey, we're going to be best friends, or hey, we're going to start talking to one another. And so I began my research in the past, in 1847. And not many people have studied this topic. The only paper I could find was by Dr. Annalise Shrout, and she was saying that the Choctaws and the Cherokees decided to give to the Irish because of intrinsic Native American values such as reciprocity and gift-giving. In addition, she argues that these donations were like tacit critiques of American and British imperialism. And finally, she said that Native Americans were moved by their own personal experiences to donate. So the Trail of Tears, they saw the Irish suffering as their own. Now, Dr. Shrout looked at the Cherokee Advocate, which was the only newspaper run by Native Americans and missionaries at the time. So I reached out to her, and she told me where they were. So I looked at the same articles that she did. And they're only housed in the National Archives, and so I had to go there a lot. I was there that same day that Gail was for the Stanley Cup. I was in black, and everyone was in red. So I stood out a little bit. So I went there, and there are these huge volumes. They're this big. They're this big, and bigger than myself. And so I would sift through each and every issue of the newspaper looking for, you can do a keyword search with just your eyes, not just an online database. I looked for Ireland, Irish. And so while I was looking through these articles, I started to realize that I agreed with Shrout on certain issues, but I disagreed with her on others. For example, I agreed with her that traditional Native American values did play a role in the Cherokee and Choctaw decisions to donate to the Irish. At the time, the Cherokees and the Choctaws saw their communities expand. They were part of the information environment of the age. Newspapers from England, India, Baltimore, they were all coming in. And in addition, they were shipping goods out to New Orleans, who would then bring it to other places. And so they really saw themselves as part of a bigger community. And in the past, they had taken care of people in their community by giving to them. And so I thought that this was definitely a motivator. Second, I found two other major forces that went into Cherokee and Choctaw decisions. First, politics in Indian territory. At the time, the Native Americans were struggling they were struggling to unite their communities. There were religious tensions, there were racial tensions, and the political elite tended to run the newspaper. And I realized that they were using the newspaper as a means of reforming and unifying their nations. And I also realized that a lot of the rhetoric that Americans were using to persuade people to donate to the Irish was very similar to the way that to the rhetoric that Native Americans were using. And so I thought that these men must have been, they were mostly men, these men must have been aware of the fact of the unifying powers of of Irish philanthropy. And finally, I also disagreed with Shrout that the Native Americans saw their own suffering in the suffering of the Irish. At the time, the Native Americans did not want to convey a vulnerable image to America. They were trying to show that they were strong, that they were united. And so they also saw themselves as reformers. This was the age of reform, temperance, religion. So they were portraying themselves as prominent, and in order to do that, they were showing that they may have been even elevated above not only the Irish, but above other Native Americans as well. And I found this out through going through all of the Cherokee Advocate and all of the articles and the secondary readings. But that was in the past. In the past, the Cherokees were emphasizing their differences. But in the present, they're emphasizing their similarities. So what gives? What happened? Why is there a statue called Kindred Spirits in the middle of Cork, Ireland? So I thought that I would find some evidence showing that they were communicating with one another between 1847 and 2017. I didn't find any evidence of that. I only found this one article in 1964. But what I did find was that the Irish were the ones who first began to say, hey, we recognize your story as our own story. In the 1960s, the Northern Irish nationalists and artists adopted Native American resistance symbols. This picture is actually by a Choctaw artist in the 1990s. He's wearing the Sinn Féin medallion there. And so it was the Irish who first began this. And in this environment, there's this guy named Don Mullen. And Don Mullen, he was from Northern Ireland, and he visited America one day in 1989. And he went to a lecture, and at the lecture, they were talking about the Choctaws. And they mentioned this donation. And so Don Mullen took it upon himself to go to the Choctaw territory, to Oklahoma, where the Choctaws were, with his dad, and thank him and thank the chief, and to invite him to Ireland. And Don Mullen was just, he was a humanitarian, but he really wasn't any type of politician or anything. But Don Mullen and his organization, which was Action from Ireland, a humanitarian organization, they wanted to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Great Irish Famine. And they wanted to celebrate it in such a way that they were also shedding light on some of the issues in the modern world, such as hunger and genocide. And they thought that, wow, the Choctaws are a really great story. They're a really great model for Irish citizens to use. And so since then, the Irish and the Choctaws have been saying, your story is our story. They say that this is how we should react to famine. This is how we should behave. And more importantly, it is now that they're saying historical suffering forms the foundation of our relationship. And there are tangible results to this relationship. Not only they don't repay one another, although they have in the past, but they generally try to solve issues for emerging nations in Africa or in Indonesia. They respond to natural disasters. And so the Irish are saying, this is how we should behave. And then the Choctaws are also, they're really interesting like organizations that they run together. And so they've kind of formed this, they're trying to put themselves on the forefront of humanitarian efforts. And so back in Middleton, the sculpture, I really just provided the context for you. I'm not exactly sure whose decision it was to erect that particular statue in that place. There's no indication that the money went directly to Cork. I do know that the money went to Memphis and then to New York and then to Dublin. And then Dublin, you don't know where it went after that. The Quakers just distributed it everywhere they thought needed it. And so I do know that Cork has tried to kind of revamp their tourism landscape in recent years, so that could have been part of it, but also communities in Ireland all decide how they remember the Irish famine, and this was Middleton's way of remembering. So significant, my research I think is significant. For one, it tells us a lot about Native American identity as well as Irish identity in the past and in the present. And it also tells us about how they build communities and what else builds community. Is it historical experience? Is it race, or et cetera, et cetera? I also think that this is a very fascinating perspective. I didn't share all of the little anecdotes I have with you guys just because there are so many, and I tried to fit them all in my paper, but if you ever want to know anything about visits or anything, like visits from the Choctaw to the Irish president, I can tell you about it because there are quite a few. And so in the future, I think that people should explore why the Choctaws and not the Cherokees. The Irish emphasize their relationship with the Choctaws in the modern era, but not with the Cherokees. And I'm not exactly sure why, and that's something I think I should have addressed in my paper. And another thing I should have addressed, I think, is what other causes have the two groups championed together? I know climate change is one, and world hunger is another, and there are also a few things against like corporations and things like that. And finally, I would like to thank the Center for the Humanities, and I would like to thank Dr. Mulcahy, who is my mentor. I would like to thank Dr. Brennan, who told me to find a topic for history methods, and this is what I found. And Dr. Annalise Strout, who told me where the articles were, where the Cherokee Advocate articles were. Dean Fowle, who I worked for this summer. Jen and Anita, who aren't here but are here in spirit, who I also worked for this summer. And Isabel the cat, who's Dr. Brennan's cat, and is a really nice cat. So, thank you.